Okay, welcome everybody and thank you for joining. This is our last session of Building Life Science Adventures 2022 and I can't believe how quick it has gone. So this session is on the topic of fishing in a global pond. So that's all about recruiting and seeking work abroad. Just before I hand you over to Melanie, if you can keep your microphones on mute throughout the discussion, that would be great. And we would love for this to be a really interactive and engaging session. So please put any questions and comments in the chat box. So that is it from me, and I hope you all enjoyed the session.
Thank you, Jasmine, and hello and good afternoon to everybody that's joining us. Welcome to the panel, of course. Welcome to everybody at home or in the office or wherever it is that you're joining us from. And indeed, welcome to the final panel session of the day and indeed the conference. So very well done for your staying power and turning up for the final session. Hopefully we can have a strong finish and end on a very interactive high. So very much looking forward to this discussion. Would very much like to hear from the audience as we go through. So we have got a chat box available. Please pop any questions in there. Don't need to save them until the end. Or maybe not even a question, just even a comment or an observation, and we'll pick up as many of those as we can. As Jasmine said, we're looking at fishing in a global pond. That's the theme of the discussion this afternoon. So we'll be looking at some of the practical and procedural considerations associated with this, not just from the perspective of those sort of looking to build their life science adventures, if you like, and develop their careers, but also from the employer's perspective as well, and hopefully just get a range of views being explored. So before we get into it and get stuck into the Q&A, it would be great to just do a few brief introductions from the panel. I'm going to start with you, Priya, and then work our way around. So Priya. We need to get you off of mute. Jasmine, I'm going to ask you to jump in.
Hi,
here we go.
Hi there.
Fine.
Yeah,
Okay.
sorry there. I just lost control of the screen for a moment and couldn't unmute.
No
but yeah,
worries.
it's lovely to, thank you very much, Melanie. It's lovely to meet everyone. So my name's Priya and I am a director at SciTribe. SciTribe is a scientific and corporate communications consultancy. So what does that mean? Myself and my colleagues, we work with life sciences companies all around the world to tell their stories, talk about the companies, the technologies, the science that they do. And my background actually is as a research scientist. So I did a degree in molecular genetics. I'm originally from Toronto. I then came to the UK to do a degree in a PhD in regenerative medicine, and eventually found myself moving towards industry. And it's been a very fulfilling career. So thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. Alex, can we hear a few words from you, please?
Yeah, of course. Thank you. So hi, everyone. My name's Alex. I head up business development at Faron. Faron's a publicly listed biotech based out of Finland. I now don't live in Finland. I now live in Philadelphia, but I started out my job at Faron in the UK, then moved to Finland for the last 18 months and now to Philadelphia. But I started out doing much the same as Priya. I started out in research, did my bachelor's in Sheffield, then spent a year in research in Australia and New Zealand, then came back, went into sales and then joined Faron from there. So that's me today.
Perfect. Thank you, Alex. Continuing with the US theme, Brad, can we hear a few words from you, please, by way of intro?
Well, thank you, Melanie. I appreciate it. So I've also my background's in science, but I've spent my entire career on the commercial side of life sciences companies, sort of across a broad cross section. Started in small molecules. I've worked in large molecules, devices, done consulting around the world. And my last company was a in vitro diagnostic company that was commercial in 18 countries around the world. Sort of the common theme around that is I've generally worked for global companies. So worked across most continents. Currently, I live in Maryland and help to attract companies here to the state of Maryland to grow their businesses and build new operations in Maryland.
Perfect. Thank you, Brad. Bit closer to home now, Ian.
Hi everyone. I'm glad to see I started my career in science and I've ended my career in science. So going back about 35 years, I was a lecturer in molecular medicine at the University of Dundee. I then joined what was then ICI, and I spent 20 years working in ICI, then Zeneca, then AstraZeneca, ending up in charge of what it would commonly be called translational science, but in those days was called discovery medicine. So looking after the compounds coming out of Audley Park, which is where I was based, the Waltham site just outside Boston, and the Pudong site just outside Shanghai. I then worked for a charity for 7 years, so Cancer Research UK, but always in drug discovery. And up until Monday this week, I was the CSO of Charles River, so the early discovery part of Charles River, which is where all the drug discovery is done. I now have my own consulting company for a whole of 2 days, but I'm going to be working with a number of oncology-specific biotechs. But it's good to see you all.
Excellent, thanks, Ian. And then last but certainly not least, Matthieu.
Thank you, Melanie, and hi everyone. Very glad to be with you today, and thank you to One Nucleus, the organizers, for having me. So I'm a scientific. I have a scientific background. I'm an engineer. Nobody's perfect. Thank you. I have been working primarily for global companies, for example, Smith & Nephew, so mostly medical device companies, as an engineer and more on the commercial side at the beginning. And then I joined Provence Promotion. So currently I'm the head of international and strategy. Provence Promotion is the official promotional agency of Marseille Provence in the south of France. So we support foreign companies setting up their business here in Provence. I have also short experience as a BD director for an American recruiting company specializing in life science based out of Boston.
Excellent. Thank you very much, all of you. And for those of you who don't know me, I'll say about 10 words about myself, although some people I can see who I do know have attended. So for those who already know me, apologies, but I'm Melanie James. I'm a lawyer and a partner at a law firm called Mills & Reeve. I'm based here in Cambridge in the UK. I work in employment, pensions and immigration, really for employers in the life sciences sector. I will confess, full disclosure, I'm not a scientist by background. I am a pure lawyer, so I'm in great company today. But really, you know, in terms of the kind of issues that I generally help businesses with, it's really the entire life cycle from hiring, firing, everything in between, and more recently, I suppose, not surprisingly, employee mobility, agility, and things like that. So talking of which, that's a great segue to get stuck into the global pond discussion. So our first question for the panel this afternoon, and we will hear from every panelist on this particular question. And I was looking at the theme for the session, and I suppose the natural question is, well, who is fishing in the global pond? Who's in it? Who's looking for who, and who is fishing for who? You know, are we looking at employers now casting their nets much wider, looking further afield in a bid to seek out and attract the best talent? Or are we actually seeing the opposite, where we're seeing an emergence of employees dipping their toes into the global waters in a bid to seek out the most attractive employers for them? So we'll start by asking the panel if they've seen any trends in this regard, who's fishing for who. And given that Ian has started his career as a scientist and is finishing his career as a scientist, I'm going to come to you first, Ian, and you can give us the pulse of your wisdom.
I mean, well, firstly, it's a really interesting question, and it's actually quite an emotive one for me to answer, because I was in charge of 6 sites on 3 different countries, and the situation pre and post Brexit for a company such as Charles River is actually, and I apologize, I'm going to use Charles River as my example, it is very different. So for our sites in the Netherlands, for our sites in Belgium, they really are continuing to fish in a global pond. And I would say that we try to recruit the best available, regardless of where they're from in the world. Now, if I'm being bluntly truthful, in the UK, I don't think that is true. Certainly not for the companies I've worked for. And there is a bit of a difference. So where a skill set is desperately needed, and I think of things like computer-aided drug design, artificial intelligence, or a specific subsetting of a therapeutic area where we need that knowledge, we really do still fish in a global pond, and we would go through whatever barriers we would encounter to recruit staff. But I'll be honest, for a fairly standard bench scientist, the red tape's got more to recruit someone from Germany. It takes a lot longer, whether we like it or not. And sometimes it's just not worth the hassle. So there has become a bit of a, and I hate saying this because I really don't approve of it, but there is almost a grade level where we will put the extra effort in and we will spend the extra time to recruit the right person for the job. But below that level, certainly for most bench scientists, we probably wouldn't.
Okay, thank you. Just to develop that point a little bit, maybe from a different perspective, Alex, I'm going to ask you about this because you strike me as somebody who's in the earlier stages of your career and very well travelled already, I would say. In terms of the hassle factor then about fishing in a global pond as somebody building their career, I mean, you're obviously working in a different jurisdiction now and have been to several. So what's your thought? You go fishing?
I mean, like for me, I agree with Ian's point quite well on that one. To come to America, you needed to be of a certain grade to get the visa to move to America as an intercompany transferee. So there's obviously a grade barrier that's now been put in that was originally for the States. And I haven't employed 600 people across 6 countries. So I can't, 6 sites in 3 countries. So I can't talk to Ian's experience, but I know there is a point that you have to be at a certain grade to get moved across the world and do that with it. But that being said, there's also has to be flexibility from your standpoint as an employee. And I think if you're willing to put the effort in and make a move yourself and personally move and throw yourself out there, it becomes almost a negotiating point at that point as well in part of it. So if the company's got to spend to move you, it becomes a difficult point that then becomes a point of there's easier people to employ. But if you're willing to throw yourself out there and move around the world, albeit at your cost or however you want to work at it. When I moved to Finland with Faron, it was relatively easy because that was pre-Brexit. So it was easy for me because it was a European country. So I could just walk in, show my passport at the police station and walk in. But now I don't know the red tape and that's part of it. So for me, it also comes down to your own personal motivations behind it. I knew that a CV looks good if you have more than one country on it. If you look like you will only work in Cambridge in one postcode, then you need kind of as well, there's also a part about your own career development. That's why I chose to move wherever I could. And that's why I took that step. But I think it's at this point, it comes down to what you're willing to give, whether it's employer market or it's an employee market. And that's where that kind of fine line sits now.
Yeah, great stuff. Thank you. Matthieu, I'm going to ask you, given that Alex raised the B word and Brexit has popped up, I wonder if you've seen any sort of immediate trends or impact in terms of retaining people in Provence, or how has it been for you in terms of your life sciences community there?
That's interesting, and it's also a good point that you mentioned. Brexit is quite important for us. There is a direct impact when looking at our results in terms of inward investment in Provence. Usually the US were the #1 foreign country investing in Provence. In 2021, for the first time, UK became the number 1 country investing in Provence. That's pretty new. And it's probably a direct effect of the Brexit. So that's what I can comment. Also, to give you a little bit background about our region. in 2021 as well. For the first time, the life science sector became the #2 sector in terms of job creation in a region when looking at the inward investment. So that's also an interesting trend. And we are representing a cluster of about 500 companies headquartered in Marseille, but covering all the south of France. And I've been discussing with some HR, some CEOs, some people here about the local trends in terms of recruiting. Of course, the COVID pandemic has been changing a few things in terms of recruiting and the way they're looking for candidates. And it's much more open, meaning that now the candidates tend to choose their employer and not the opposite. That's the big difference today. I mean, home office has become mainstream, so there are more opportunities for the candidates. Also, the other effect is that the wages are increasing, especially in the south of France, because now they tend to align with Paris for the same reason. So that's also a new trend. So I guess for the employers, it's more challenging today. And for the employees, for the people looking for a job in the life science sector, it's probably, there are more opportunities nowadays.
Yeah, I agree. Definitely seeing that myself. Let's get, Brad, if we can bring you in just to get some US perspective on this, and then Priya, I'll come to you once we've heard from Brad. So what trends have you observed, Brad, stateside in this regard?
I think the last 2 years, a couple of interesting things happened at the same time. We had the pandemic, and then we had this huge influx of capital into the biotech market. And because of that, you create an opportunity and a pressure. So the opportunity is, Matt said, more and more people realize there are a lot of jobs that can be done remotely. So in many cases, you're not talking about relocating people around the world. You're talking about hiring someone from another continent into a job that's a non-lab-based, non-bench-based job. We have companies here that have chief medical officers that are in another country because they can. So that's one. I think it's really opened up people's eyes to the ability for people to work remotely. It's even if that was possible before, it's caused them to realize that that's something they may or may not have to consider for the future and how people want to work. With all the influx of capital that occurred, it put a lot of pressure on companies to find talent as quickly as possible. And so that also put pressure on them to consider alternatives that weren't your typical, I'm going to show up to the office every day and work 8 to 5. So I think those are trends that we'll see how they go over the next couple of years, and if they start to retreat a little bit back to what they were before. The other thing that's interesting I've seen in the last probably 6 months or so, all over the world, and particularly here, and Ian's probably very familiar with this, there's just a huge explosion in biomanufacturing. And where it was proteins and monoclonals before, obviously in cell and gene therapy, there just is you can't find enough workers to fill the jobs that are there. We probably have close to 1,000 open positions right here in Maryland today that we could fill. So I've really seen a lot of training centers around the world who are working to train people, typically certifications, or even people who are in jobs looking for advanced certification with different types of equipment, starting to do more and more of that remotely. And so I think there's an interesting opportunity as we go forward for people who don't live in areas that are traditionally life sciences focused, to maybe be able to get some of their initial training online, have a foot in the door, and be able to relocate to they obviously these are jobs that require you to be physically somewhere to work in a manufacturing facility. But I think that may really open up some interesting opportunities for people who live outside of these traditional centers to get that education and training and relocate to good paying jobs in new places.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And then finally on this question, Priya, do those comments ring true for you, or have you got any different experiences?
Yeah, so I absolutely, I think all the speakers have provided some really relevant points from different perspectives. I think just linking to Brad's point, thinking about people who might have considered the life sciences sector, who might have looked at it before and wondered if it was for them for a career, but also, and people coming from other sectors as well, which we know can be rich with experience, but maybe not, different kinds of experiences, but not directly life sciences. But also people who maybe want to put their toe in the water with working for an international company, something outside of their norm. And I think remote working provides that opportunity where you can potentially try working for someone else abroad, or try working in the life sciences sector without potentially having to do all of the relocation that comes with it. So in a way, you could think of it as a bit of risk mitigation for the individual, for the employee, and potentially also for the employer.
Yeah, a great point, actually, of course, because you can minimize, I suppose, maybe not eliminate entirely some of the practical hassle factor and upheaval to one's life by what would have traditionally been a full relocation. Absolutely. Thank you. That's super helpful. Let's have a look at this issue then about what makes an employer attractive. I'm sort of getting the sense that we're probably in more of an employees market at the moment, and employers are mobilizing very swiftly to make themselves attractive to the best talent. One of the things I come across routinely in my work, or one of the challenges I hear from clients that I help, is this the recruitment and retention challenge, which has been, it's that perennial issue, seems to have gotten worse, especially in this sector, in the last couple of years. So and I'll start with you, Alex, on this question, if I may. So in terms of what makes an employer attractive to those looking to embark on their life science adventure and build their career, based on your own experience, what do you think is most important to the job seeker?
I think we're all, well, I think we're all at different stages of a career here. So I think I'm going to just take it, and I'm going to start from my early career. I think for me, what makes an employer attractive is career progression. And I know that, titles are one thing, but actually what comes with a title and the experience that a company's willing to give you to get through your career. It's about being able to learn a number of skills. And I think that's where you go through this kind of small versus big company and that sort of thing, as well as also it's that kind of thing that I think is really important when looking for an employer to be attractive. And it's also one to find that's willing to give you that career progression, experience in terms of opportunities as well. So you can actually start going through your career as well. Now, obviously there's also got to be an element of salary to it and how much you're going to get paid. But there's a point of which where you could pay someone $1 million, pick a currency, I don't know which one we want to work, we all live around the world here, pick €1 million a month kind of thing. But if you're working 24 hours a day, working at the weekends, no time to yourself, then you can pay someone infinite amounts of money. So that's why I always try and take money off the table and start looking at what is this job actually going to give me in terms of for myself as a person, so I can have some flexibility there. But also, where will it take me in 2 years' time, 5 years' time? And then where does that go to my kind of, if I want to achieve my career goals, how does it get me there? So I think that's what I think it comes from an employer.
Yeah, that's interesting, actually. So in a sense, taking whatever the next career step is sort of how does that fit in terms of the longer term plan and my overall sort of journey and experience, I think, of somebody building a career. Okay. Brad, I'd be interested to hear from you on this then. I mean, from your perspective, do you have a view in terms of being on the commercial side? What would you do? What would you put in place? What would you think would be the way to attract that talent and make an employer or a company more attractive?
Well, I think for individuals, there's a really important decision point there, because they're very, very different types of jobs depending on the type of company you're looking at. Generally, the smaller the company, and Alex sort of alluded to this, the smaller the company, the greater your opportunities are, right? There's a lot more opportunity to do more jobs because there's fewer people doing them. And then conversely, the larger the company becomes, as Ian will tell you, the more strict and rigid and formatted and fixed things become. But on the opposite side of that is the amount of risk involved. Small companies inherently are risky, particularly in the business that we're in. So I think I found early on, it's important for people to sort of understand what their personal risk appetite is. You know, are they the sort of person who's risk averse and wants to make sure that 10 years from now, they still have a job, they're building money towards their pension or their 401k in the United States? Or they're the type of person who's willing to risk being unemployed 2 years from now because the drug didn't survive clinical trials. And I think that's really critical. It also has a lot to do with the timing of someone's personal life. Are they married? What's their risk appetite their spouse has? Do they have children where maybe some of that risk has to be taken off the table to suit their family? Because early on in your career, if you don't have those other things sort of bounding your decisions, there really are some opportunities for people to take bigger swings and take maybe more risky, dramatically more rewarding opportunities in life.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Ian, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I'll just build on a couple of points that Brad had made earlier. So right just now, the biggest issue that's facing us is retention of staff. It's not recruitment of staff, it's retention of staff. And it's for the reason that Brad very eloquently described. In 2021 and still in 2022, there has been a huge influx of money into life sciences and biotech. And not only is it retention of staff, it's actually retention of key roles. So because there is so much recruitment going on, you know, other companies are coming in and they're raiding very specific layers throughout an organization. For us, it was project managers, project leaders, and we would literally lose them. So salary, you know, let's be honest, salary is obviously important. But I think I'm the last generation of benefits packages playing a major role. Nobody seems to be bothered about pensions anymore. I used to be really worried. But actually, to me, the key to retaining staff and also recruiting staff now, flexibility is the new black gold. And you might be surprised. Alex mentioned 600 staff in 3 countries, and the vast majority of those are lab-based. You can't do lab work. You can't do wet work from home. But flexibility is still driving what they want post-pandemic. And what they want is to come in, do the wet work. And let's be honest, with the technologies we're working with now and the types of modalities that we're studying, actually data analysis takes up as much time as the wet work that you would do in the lab. In fact, in many cases, you know, high content biology, the data analysis actually takes up more time than the time you spend by the machine in the lab. And allowing people to come in, do the wet work, go home. Do I mind if they go home, pick up the kids and do the data analysis a bit later on in the day? Not really. Do I care if they come in early, do the work, go home, don't work? I don't. So that sort of flexibility in the way that staff are working is, for me, the most powerful motivator to keep them engaged. And the surprising thing is, and I know from speaking to some of my colleagues in my old company, AZ or GSK, it's actually more efficient. So it's actually good for business. It doesn't sound like it should, but it is actually better for everyone. So you're creating the flexibility the staff want, and you're actually being more productive with the time in the day. So that's what I think is going to be the key in the future, is making sure that, you know, that doesn't all get lost and we don't all suddenly force everyone to go back to the office or back to the lab or a very constrained environment.
From my perspective, I've not seen a glimmer of that happening across any of the employers that I work with, which is a vast number. I think very much the hybrid working, long live the flexibility, it seems to work for all concerned, subject to, you know, certain parameters, but by and large, it seems to have been sort of received very, very well and is working very effectively too. So in terms of, I'm sort of just going to turn that question on its head. So we've had a few comments around what makes an employer attractive. I'm also keen to hear from the panel about what makes an employee attractive to an employer. I'm conscious that, you know, this conference is largely geared at sort of generating discussion for those who are building their careers or starting out in life sciences careers. So if these were candidates, you know, rising stars looking to make themselves attractive to, you know, great employer, beating off the competition, what do we think, you know, what are employers looking for? So Priya, maybe we can start with you on that question.
Yeah, thanks, Melanie. So I think for me, in terms of what makes an employee attractive is going back to a word. I've just had some conversations recently with various people at different stages of their careers, and the word is gumption. So, and I looked this up, hence I kind of was unable to mute earlier because I was looking up the definition just to repeat it here. And that means shrewd or spirited initiative and resourcefulness. And I think it's that spirit that for someone looking to build out their career over a long period of time, that for me has definitely been a key thing, a key factor in kind of making it and even changing career midway. Because I think I mentioned earlier, I've been a researcher and then moved into industry. And I've seen this in others as well. I think referring to Alex's point about how much you want to put into it, not only the employer, but the employee. And I think it references back to that. And so just to also comment, I didn't mention at the start that I've been working remotely pre-COVID. And I've been working from a number of countries, the UK, Sweden, Myanmar, in Southeast Asia, and also in Finland, and also from time to time from Canada. And I think the key thing is being able to show that gumption, whether it's a client, like in my case with my company, or an employer, when I've been employed full time and been able to have flexibility. So yeah, I wondered if anyone else had thoughts on that as well. Thanks.
Perfect. Matthieu, maybe you can give us your thoughts next in terms of what you're seeing, you know, in terms of your local life sciences community and the businesses in Provence. I mean, what is appealing to them in terms of the candidate? You know, what kind of qualities would that candidate have? Who would they regard as being the best talent?
There is here another point that I would like to highlight and to bring into the discussion is because now the candidates are moving, the employees are moving from one country or one region to the other. So they have the choice to live wherever they want. And for example, if you would like to, if you are seeking for a job in Provence, probably you will need to match with the local recruiting market, meaning that here we have lots of small companies, R&D companies. So I would advise to be also to have an R&D profile matching with the needs here. For example, we have less manufacturing, so this is not the right region if you are looking for such a position. So you would rather be an R&D engineer, scientist, and fit with the local market. And also, I think it's important to consider roles that are where there is lots of tension, speaking about quality, regulatory. It was already the case before, but now the tension is even higher than it used to be before the pandemic. So I would advise to consider some roles where companies need to find candidates where it's really difficult, and also to match with the region you would like to live in. So that's the two points I wanted to add in the discussion.
Perfect, thank you. Ian, I wouldn't mind hearing your views on this as well in terms of what makes an employee attractive. I'm trying to I'm interested in, you know, this is the employee's expectation of what they want out of their experience. This is the employer's expectation and wish list, if you like. You know, are they aligned, or, you know, how unaligned are they? So I'll hear from you, and then Brad, I'll ask you for a comment if I may.
So I'm probably going to sound like an old man, and I am an old man.
You're experienced man. It's the voice of experience.
Interesting word, Melanie, because that to me is the king. That to me is experience is king. So I do a lot of mentoring with both graduate and postgraduate students about careers in industry. And I like to disappoint them by saying that about 2 years after you get your degree and less than a year after you get your PhD, they become stars on your McDonald's badge. So qualifications don't really count for much with I think most employers. They'll help you. I can't deny they'll help you, but actually experience is the key. And to me, someone who moves about from company to company, and we're seeing that increasingly. When I look at CVs, very often they've been in 6 or 7 different companies. And the questions I would always ask them is, why did you move? And if they can give me an eloquent answer, well, it doesn't really have to be eloquent if they can give me an accurate answer that describes, and there is a rationale to that, then I am usually hugely impressed. So if they're moving to get different experiences, maybe they're even moving to get more of the same experience. But certainly in life sciences, there is something about, and I am not directly relating experience to age, but it's something about the experience you've had. For me, it's all about projects, but it could be different parts. I realized other parts of the industry think about the science that they do in a very different way. But to be completely honest with you, the thing that makes an employee attractive to me is experience, and actually often different experiences.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. And Brad, anything to add to that in terms of what would make an employee attractive and put them in sort of the best talent sort of category?
I think an important word that we used before for employers is flexibility. And that's also incredibly helpful on the employee side. People who want to do the same thing every day for the rest of their lives are a little bit more challenging for a lot of companies, right? Everything changes. Sometimes it changes very quickly. Sometimes it changes more slowly. But certainly, I think most employers really appreciate employees who, Ian sort of described it, want new opportunities or looking for new opportunities, understand things aren't always perfect and change, or are a little bit more willing to go with the flow. I think something that's, and this may just be my personality quirk and other people can weigh in on this, is I think it's always better to have these discussions up front with an employer about what your objectives are, to make sure that they align and to hopefully understand whether or not your expectations are realistic. Employers don't want, they don't want to have to replace employees. I mean, that's not a win for anyone. It's costly both from a time and money perspective. But if you're walking into discussion, your expectation is, you're 1 year out of school and 2 years from now, you want to be the chief medical officer for a company. That's probably not well aligned with what's going to happen. So maybe those discussions, I think, can be very valuable because both, maybe the employee needs to align their expectations closer to reality. And in my case, a lot of times those discussions are helpful because I have flexibility in where I can sort of assign people and what sort of roles they can go into that better match their personality types. And I'd rather know that as soon as possible so that we're as closely aligned as possible to make this a longer term relationship. Excellent.
Thank you very much. Sort of leading on from that, actually, and sort of discussion about experiences and sort of developing your experiences and gaining different types of experiences. Something that I'd like to explore now with the panel, and Alex, I'm going to start with you on this one, if I may. So this is around, for those in the process of building their careers and developing their experience, when is a good time, and I'm asking you this, Alex, as somebody that's moved around a lot already, and Priya, I'll get your view on this in a little while. So when would you say, speaking from personal experience or just more broadly, when's a good time or the right time to start moving around and going global, as they say?
Day one.
Day one.
Like, I don't understand how I've looked at like my peers who I graduated with, and I think out of all of them, most of them are within the same postal code of graduation. And I've never understood the fascination behind it. And now that people have been given more flexibility you can go where you want as long as the job gets done. I think that's what Ian was basically saying with his scientists. As long as the job gets done, I don't care when or how you do it. There's two benefits to moving around. One, you actually get more experience in terms of not just in terms of professional point of view, you can actually get more experience. You can go and learn new skills and get new skills from different companies. But I think there's a personal benefit to it as well. You start understanding what it's like to actually work and live in a different culture. And you start understanding that not everyone is English, and you start understanding that bit. So there's a lot of personal development that actually comes from living abroad. And then you understand the frustrations of it. And then you kind of learn this reflection. You become a better team worker because of it. There's just a lot of benefits from it. And I don't think, also on the flip side of it all, as I think it was a point that Brad made, when you get to, I don't know how life goes, I'm not going to comment, but when you get married, when you've got kids, and when you go to beyond like your 30s, I presume, when that all kind of starts kicking in, those kind of thoughts, you've bought a house, you don't have that flexibility to just go, you know what, let me just throw a dart at a globe and let's go wherever that lands. And so you actually have to think about other people. So selfishly or not, whether you want to do it or not, it becomes a bigger discussion. So I think with the opportunity you've got now, why wouldn't you do it? It just doesn't make sense to me to wait and go, oh, I'll travel the world when I'm 40, because that's a hard thing. And then also use someone else's money, like, to go elsewhere and enjoy it. Like, why not? If they're going to pay you to be in Finland or wherever, use someone else's money to live there and enjoy yourself.
Great answer, thank you. Priya,
if my lawyer's watching, can I just say, like, I didn't use to move to America and enjoy myself. I did it for the business.
They're getting the return on the investment, I'm absolutely sure. Priya, so you're pretty well travelled in your career as well. What's your experience in terms of, is there a right time? Is there a good time? On the same page as Alex?
So, yeah, I mean, it's a very interesting question, because I would say that although, yes, there are benefits to traveling or living elsewhere and working elsewhere earlier on in your career, which is actually what I did, I think that it can benefit you at any point in your career. And I think it's going back to what Alex said about on different levels as well. There's your career development and there's your personal development. And I think that one is not exclusive of the other. And the amount that I've gained, I mean, just learning different forms of English. I mean, people joke about,
that's a really weird one. Sorry, Priya, that's like a weird one for me now in America, that American, British, two different Englishes completely.
Absolutely, the words, but also just the way English is used. And I think the saying is 2 nations divided by a language.
And now, then you also lived in Finland, so like you get like Finnish English is a completely different English to English.
Yes, correct. So I lived in Finland for about 1.5 years, and I spent a lot of time amongst Finnish speakers, and also people who also having to speak Finnish with people that didn't speak as much English. And I came back to the UK last year with constructing my sentences more like I would in Finnish, actually. So these experiences of communicating with people all over, even within what was my native language, or I thought was my native language in Canada, I've grown so much. And being a communicator, these things are very, have turned out to be incredibly useful. Not to leave out the experiences in Asia, working with people while based in Myanmar, in Hong Kong, Korea, mainland China, Singapore. And I think that just that in itself kind of opens your eyes to different ways of doing things within your own field. So yeah, but going back to when, I would say at any point in your career, actually. So for me, maybe it was career ambitions when I was younger that I moved abroad to do a specific kind of research that was, more proliferative in the UK. But actually, I've moved for personal reasons later on in my career, and yet my career has still benefited from those moves.
I also add on your point, as I don't disagree that I think you can benefit later in your career. I'm working on the return of investment that if I do it when I'm younger, that it works the same as my pension. If I start at 20, it's better than starting at 40, and then it's better than starting at 50, and that it will work exponentially better for the rest of my time. I'm not denying your point that if I'd start later, it would have also benefited me. Just get it done and get the exponential growth on it.
Yeah, absolutely, Alex. I just a quick other point is about the kind of commitment you need to put in. So there was one point where there was interest in, when I was in academia, about going out to the States to actually work to get a job, like an academic post or tenure track post. And what I did was apply for a fellowship, a research fellowship, to go try it out for 3 months. So there are ways, and there's funding available depending on what stage you are at your career, to try things out, but maybe not go the full hog or the whole hog, as they say.
Perfect, thank you. I'm just going to jump into the chat for a minute because we've had a few questions in, and we've got a question in that seems appropriate to deal with now. So thank you, Catherine, for popping this one into the chat. And here it is. I'll just read it out. It says, although individuals value the experience gained in different countries, do you think employers really value that experience?
Can I just
please,
point out,
yeah.
so there's a really good point here, and that was I think they do if they've done it, because
yeah.
CFO has lived around the world, and he just goes, anyone who's lived abroad, he instantly goes, right, I will interview them just to hear their stories about where they've been, because he gets that then someone's not lived in the same postcode, they've gone abroad, they've tried it, they get that you've got to speak a different language, you have to then work with a different set of people. And to someone who's done it, they reflect on it and they go, well, I went through that hardship. And then they get that that's a pain for them, and they've learned 2 sets of skills there. So that's how we view it at Faron. But that's one company. I could say something else, and I presume everyone else has got their own opinion on this one.
Yeah, there may be a variety of opinions. Let's check. Brad, have you got any thoughts on that? I mean, from speaking through the employer's lens, if you like, do employers value the variety and experience in working abroad and being well traveled? Is that a thing for the employer?
I think it depends on the company and what you're doing. I mean, unfortunately, I hate to say this as the American, typically being seen as the people who view ourselves as geocentric, but in this industry, the US market is by far the largest healthcare market in the entire world. And so I think in most countries, there's a huge benefit to companies having people who are experienced with the US market, because that's almost universally where companies look to commercialize a product first, depending on what they are. So I think that's hugely helpful regardless of where you are. I think today you'd be remiss not to find a company who wants people who believe they understand China and the Chinese market there. So I think those are some critical experiences that people all over the world value. I've seen some very weird things working globally. I would never go to anywhere in Europe or Asia and pretend to understand the dynamics of the commercial market space there or anything else, but I very frequently have worked with people from other countries who believe they understand the marketplace in the United States. So I think it's important, that you work with people who understand these are all very complexly different marketplaces, and the way you interact with key opinion leaders, or the way you conduct studies, the way that products get reimbursed are incredibly different. So I think as companies get bigger, there's a better understanding you need people with more country-specific expertise to help create value in the company.
Perfect, thank you very much. I'm just conscious of the time, so at 4:20 now, we've got a hard stop in 10 minutes time, and I do want to get it a little bit more into the chat box. So what I'm going to do is ask one final question of the panel, and I'll ask all of you to contribute to this, and then we will mop up as many of the questions in the chat as we can with the time that we have left. So the question I'm going to put out there now is, as many employers moved to hybrid working arrangements as a result of the pandemic, employee mobility and agility has probably never been as widespread or in demand as it is right now. So what do the panel see as the highlights and the lowlights of the newfound freedom, both for the employer and for the employee? And I will start with you, Ian, on this one.
Well, to be honest, I think I've already answered the highlight. The highlight is being, as an employer, being flexible is helping us retain staff. It's helping us attract staff as well. The low point, I think, is there is still a need for face-to-face meetings, and it's now actually harder to have face-to-face meetings. So I managed to have, funnily enough, not very far from where I'm based today, we had a big strategy challenge, and we achieved more in 2 hours with 7 people in one room than we achieved in about 4 weeks on video calls. And being able to find that flexibility that allows you still to meet face-to-face for crucial meetings. So it goes back to the point that Brad made. It's flexibility works both ways. We really need the employee to be flexible as much as we can be flexible in the way that they interact in the working environment. So to me, the negative, if you like, is the difficulty now in actually getting everybody together in one place.
Indeed, yeah.
And Melanie,
Brad, were you going to?
Yeah, if I can add to that, and I'll answer one of the questions that's in the chat. I think the downside is Ian really hits this, right? There is a benefit to human beings connecting with other human beings. And this 2-dimensional world that we live in all day long is not the same as the 3-dimensional world. And in many ways, this may be like Ian's last 15 years, right? Where he was on conference calls all day long with people all around the world. You do have that problem of it being more constant, and having big chunks of time at various times you're involved. But I think it's more challenging for people who don't get to spend time with other people to build personal relationships with them. Yeah. I realized early on in my career, there was a tremendous amount I learned, not from doing my job, but in those times when I might run into someone in the hallway at night when I was working on something and just have a discussion with them and get somebody else's perspective on something I was working on that wasn't their job. But so I think that's a little bit challenging because we don't have those random interactions anymore. And at the end of the day, let's all be honest, this is a very personal business, right? When people decide who to give assignments to, when people decide who to give promotions to, some of that goes into it. And the ability for people to understand who you are becomes a little bit more challenging in this environment.
Yeah, agreed. In a sense, you've touched there, Brad. Again, as you say, the question in the chat, thanks, Stewart, for putting that in there. The question was, does remote working, global or otherwise, damage work culture for the employer and the employee? And I think certainly in my experience, I've seen or have a concern that, that bond between employer and employee, is that going to sort of harm that loyalty, that goes between the two, and also from co-worker to co-worker as well, and sort of the relationship and basic human contact element that's obviously very important. But just following on, so let's develop that. Matthieu, let's hear from you. Have you got any highlights and lowlights in terms of this newfound freedom?
Thank you, Melanie. I fully agree with what Brad and Ian just said. And in France, it's even more important because the culture is different compared to Anglo-Saxon countries like the US and UK. Remote management, remote office was not really there before the pandemic, so it's quite new here. It's becoming a common practice, but it's not culturally there like in the US. So there is a big challenge here to have candidates, for example, the employers still want them to move nearby the company. They don't want them to be in another region, like in Paris, for example. Now the candidates, they're asking, for example, for probationary period in another region, in another city. And that's a real challenge in terms of management. So this is what we are facing here, and it's not in our culture, but also another short comment is about the work-life balance. And now regions like Provence, regions outside of Paris, have become more attractive after the pandemic because they can better offer both the quality of life an environment. For example, here we are between mountains and the sea, with job opportunities at the same time. So there were lots of tenders, lots of studies after or during the pandemic or just after, showing that, for example, Provence became the #1 destination for executives moving outside of Paris. So this is a new trend, and we hope that we can benefit from this.
Great. Right, in our final few minutes, if I can ask Alex and Priya, if you're able to be brief, the highlights and lowlights. Alex, I'll ask you this. Is there any chance to disconnect anymore then? Or are you always on? Are you always working online?
I mean, I'm just used to always working. I had a family business before I joined life sciences. It's just part and parcel, but I think it's even harder now. And since you are a global team, you know, it then means starting work at 5 a.m. for meetings and then finishing up. And then by the time I'm finishing up, someone's starting the day. So you're just getting a constant flow of emails. So I think there's definitely bonus points for flexibility. There's also negatives for the fact that you will wake up with 42 emails and then the first 2 hours of your day is sorting through them.
Perfect. And Priya?
Yeah, so going back to the word flexibility, I think is key for my in my experience. I think that you have a lot of experience flexibility, but at the same time, it's how you manage that flexibility, if that makes sense. So having some kind of framework. I could answer emails from all over at many hours, during many hours of the day. And I think it's just setting that framework and making that clear about, to your, working that out either with your employer or, with your clients, as in my case, about how you work. And I think being transparent, being honest, and being clear, I think clear is and communicating about that is incredibly important. But it's funny because I spend a lot of time at my desk working at my computer now or my laptop, and I can take that anywhere with me. So I'm finding that actually scheduling physical things outside of the 9 to 5 is helping enforce that, okay, I'm now chatting with someone face to face. I can't check my phone right now, because otherwise it is just so, I'm just being really honest. It's so easy to do. And, being keen, you feel, oh, it's just so easy to reply. So I think there's
self-control, Priya. Yes, self-discipline, self-control. Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Right, before I hand back to Jasmine at One Nucleus, who will take us to the final item of the day, which I believe is the award, the big reveal. I would like to thank our panelists very, very much for being part of this and joining from your various locations and time zones. I certainly enjoyed myself. I hope everybody that's tuned in also got something out of the session. Apologies if we were not able to cover everything in the chat box. We did our best, but hopefully there'll be another opportunity to pick up some of those at a later date. So Jasmine, without further ado, thank you very much, and over to you.
Thank you, and thank you so much, Melanie, for chairing such a wonderful session, and to our panelists for sharing your perspectives. Just bear with me one moment while I have a brief tech transition as we move on to the award presentation. I'm just going to remove the spotlights from you guys, and then can I ask, while I do that, Tahira, if you are able to come on camera. Lovely, won't be long. Thank you for sticking around. Wonderful, almost there. And here we go. Okay, so for this final part of the session, I'm delighted to hand you over to Tahira, who is representing Johnson & Johnson Innovation, who have very kindly sponsored our Life Science Inspiration of the Year Award. So I'm going to hand you over to Tahira, and she is going to announce our winner.
Thank you very much, Jazz. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to meet you, and thank you for the wonderful discussion earlier today. Really appreciate it. So I'm Tahira Khan. I'm from Johnson & Johnson Innovation. My scope is really focused on Janssen, which is our pharmaceutical branch. And I'm in charge of the early innovation transaction team in London. In this role, I really manage a team to shape and enable innovation with institutions, with biotechs in the UK, but as well as in other European countries. So in the whole EMEA region, as you see behind me. And we are here to collaborate and really to, do it in different ways, licensing, incubation via our virtual G Labs incubation support, or via our equity fund, Johnson & Johnson Development Corporation. It's really an exciting team, an exciting role as well. And yes, we really are here to enable innovation and to make sure that we can shape and finance as well the next therapeutic solution treatments for patients who are in need. So this is why we are pleased to work every day. And so Jazz and the team had asked me to announce the winner, and I have the honor to really offer the award to John McCafferty from IONTAS, who is the founder at Maxion Therapeutics. So really well done, John. John is a brilliant scientist. We have just discussed about career moves, and in your career, I understand that you've moved from science to entrepreneurship. You've been a pioneer and inventor of antibody phage display. You were a co-founder at the Cambridge Antibody Technology, which was acquired by MedImmune. You've established the proteomic group at the Wellcome Trust Sanger Institute. You've led research, especially the research department of biochemistry at the University of Cambridge. You founded IONTAS, which was acquired as well. And then you went on and created Maxion Therapeutics. And that's a wonderful example of a career deeply embedded in science as well as entrepreneurship. And this journey is very, very inspiring for all of us. So I'm really pleased to announce you as the winner, and pleased to, provide this award to you, John. Congratulations, and all the best in your innovation journey.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. And thanks to One Nucleus. Thanks to whoever nominated me. I don't know who that was. And also to the people who voted for me. This is actually the first award I've ever won. And a little voice is saying, does this mean it's all over? Am I finished? But hopefully not. I plan to keep going. I know people have had a couple of long days here, so I'll keep my marks sort of fairly brief. I think you've covered some of the kind of the career trajectory there, and I think in some ways maybe a little atypical in that I've jumped across this invisible barrier between academia and commercial science, starting most people of course doing their PhDs and at some point making a one-way transition into a company, and that's not quite how it happened with me. In fact, and there's also been some pretty good discussion points around careers these last few days. One thing I was reflecting on was risk and attitude to risk, perhaps. We had some discussion about people traveling and doing it while you're young, when maybe you can get away with it. But I would say for me, a big moment in my career was when I'd made the transition to be a commercial scientist at Amersham International. And then I made the jump to become a founder of Cambridge Antibody Technology. At the time, I had a young child, and a lot of the people around me thought it was a bit crazy and a bit risky to go off and do that. But again, my attitude was, well, what can go wrong? I'll be back in the jobs market in another year or two if it doesn't work out. And as long as I can justify that it didn't screw up because of me, I'll be okay, And in fact, it was a great success. During that period, we invented antibody phage display, developed the drug that went on to become Humira, world's biggest selling drug, and eventually the company was sold, as you said, to AstraZeneca. I went back to academia for 10 years, so I jumped back over the line at the Sanger Institute and the University of Cambridge. And another big moment came for me at the biochemistry department, jumping the other way again, and when I decided to found IONTAS. Now, of course, I'd like to portray myself as a big, brave soldier who's not afraid of risks and so on. But actually, I have to also say that in both of those occasions, it was, let's say, an assisted jump, and that the situation behind me was falling apart, and that they were closing down Amersham at one point, and my grant had run out at the university. But nonetheless, I think it's useful to not necessarily cling so tightly. I think especially these days, I think it's really a seller's market, I think, in terms of recruiting, and there's opportunities for young people to try stuff out and, you know, and go for that. So those would be some of my reflections. I sold IONTAS a year and a half ago, but I'm still working there as part of the Fair Journey group, and also working up some technology that we'd invented in the previous years into my new company, Maxion Therapeutics. And since this is related to careers, I would say we're looking for people in both companies. So, you know, pass on your CVs. I can't really tell the ages of the people just from the names, but if there's any young ones or even some old ones there, do let us know. So I think for me, I would say the biggest benefit over my career is I've just really enjoyed science. You know, it's just, that just makes it everything else so much easier. It makes it easier to work hard and you know, and keep going. So I would say I've also been lucky in my career in terms of the places that I've ended up with and the people I've ended up working with. And you know, it's my ambition to continue working hard to stay lucky. So I'll finish there and just say thanks very much again to One Nucleus and everyone involved in this. Thank you.
Thank you, John, and huge congratulations. I'm going to bring Tony in now for some closing remarks. Thank you.
Thanks, Jazz. So just it falls to me really to do the nice bit at the end of giving out lots of thanks without having done any of the work. So I just had to thank obviously our sponsors and supporters that have made this possible, but equally our speakers who have been candid and open and frank on all the panels I've certainly sat through. And I keep hearing similar words coming up about flexibility and authenticity, opportunity and inspiration. And actually, no more fitting winner of the Inspiration Award than John. I think he's inspired many of us for years. So congratulations, John, and very well deserved. But I guess John touched upon something just at the end, was his key to all of this is just make sure you enjoy it. And I think enjoy the journey and change the journey if you're not enjoying it, and another door will open. So situations force change as well as choice. But I think just focusing on enjoying is probably the best advice I'd seen come out across the whole of the 2 days, I think, and there's been lots and lots of good advice. And not just aimed at students coming into the sector. I think advice is really useful for everybody, whatever stage of career you're at. So thanks for everyone for sharing that and the delegates for being part of it. Just a final reminder that we have the Bio Wednesday session online from 5 o'clock for those able to stay on, and they'll be discussing what's the best use of carbon in life sciences, given it's such a pressure for everybody these days, I guess, citizens through to businesses. And what's been great is the fact carbon wasn't wasted on producing hot air over 2 days, which is also nice to reflect back on. And last but not least, before I say goodbye, just thanks to the One Nucleus team for bringing this together. It's a pleasure to be at the front. So thank you all. Have a great onward journey, wherever that career goes. And we'll hope to catch up very soon. Thank you.